Thank you. I want to turn to Luke 24 with you this morning. And there are no angels in this passage. There are angels, no doubt, around us, but not in the passage, but not in the one we're going to read. But there are amazing supernatural events that are always accompanied with God and His work in our lives and in His work in history. So we're going to read from verse 13, a little passage that's well known to us. It fits with the time where we are, just post the resurrection of Jesus, and it also, I hope, will encourage us in our lives. Reading from verse 13, then. That very day, two of them were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What is this conversation that you're holding with each other as you walk?" And they stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, named Cleophas, answered him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" And he said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back saying that they had even seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the woman had said, but him they did not see." And he said to them, "O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. So they drew near to the village to which they were going. He acted as if he were going farther, but they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, for it's toward evening, and the day is far spent." He went in and to stay with them. And when he was at table with them, he took the bread, and he blessed it, broke it, and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. And he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened to us the scriptures?" And they rose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem. And they found the 11 and those who were with them gathered together, saying, "The Lord has risen indeed and has appeared to Simon." Then they told them what had happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread. And we're going to end just there, praying the Lord to bless his word this morning to us. There is an angel there, of course. You see the angel, kind of implicit, whatever. Just last week, I had a FaceTime call with my daughter in America and her little grandson, my grandson, and they're on his way home from school. And we were chatting, and I said to him, "So what's happening today?" He's 5 years old, and he's into all sorts of things, as 5-year-olds are, and all sorts. And anyway, he said, "I've got an invisible dog." And I said, "Wow." I said, "That's brilliant." And I said, and tell me about your invisible dog." Well, he says, "No, nobody else knows." And I said, "That's okay, it will be between us." And he said, "Well, he can teleport." And I'm thinking, you're a 5-year-old of this generation, because I certainly wouldn't have known what teleporting was. Teleporting. So where is he? He's in Canada. He lives in New England. He lives in Maine, up in in Portland in Maine, on the east coast of the States. And I said, that's amazing. Very convenient that, he's not here right now. And of course, I couldn't see him because he's invisible. And he said, but, he can freeze me. I said, oh, could he freeze me? No, he can only freeze me. And that's as far as we got that day. And I thought, that's really fascinating. Do you ever wonder how children have these invisible friends? I'm not going to ask how many people here had an invisible friend or still have an invisible friend. If you're fine talking in your room to your invisible friend, I'm sure there are people who think, I have an invisible friend because I'm talking to Jesus so many times as I'm out and walking. And nowadays, of course, if you've got little AirPods in, it can look as if you're actually talking to somebody, and they think, oh, he's all right, he's not mad, he's on a conversation. But I'm actually with no AirPods in, and I'm still talking, and I'm having conversations with Jesus many times about many things, and I have an invisible friend, really, and you have, in one sense. One day he will become perfectly visible and his glory will be seen, and we shall see him as he is. And lots of these mysteries that we're wrestling with will all be gone, and we'll be entered into a new world of understanding which will never end also, because we'll continue to get to know him better and better and better, and we have eternity and it never ends, and every day becomes better than the day before, if there are such things as days, and I've no idea what that'll all be like, but I know it'll be something amazing. And I was thinking about this whole experience of these two. We don't know if it's a husband and wife. Some people think it is Cleophas and Mary. We don't know. We just know it's Cleophas. We know that because he's named. And Luke is an historian. And Luke, it's wonderful to have those historical connections throughout Luke's gospel and the Acts of the Apostles. They anchor lots of things. For those of us who like time and place and geography and detail, that sort of person. And so he gives us lots of those details. It's that very day. It's the day of the resurrection. It's the day when all of these events were happening that we were thinking about last night with Mary and the other Marys, all the Marys. There's so many Marys, the 5 Marys and so forth. And all that was going on, the toing and the froing and the bits of news and the hearing things, but not sure because, well, they'd heard things, but they weren't sure. And they're going to a village. It seems as though it's their home, because when they arrive there, they can invite him into their home. And this little place is called Emmaus. It's 7 miles. So it's not just next door. It's a fair journey to go 7 miles walking from here to, well, I'm not even sure where anywhere 7 miles from Portrush is. It's 7 miles. That's what it is. And that'll take you most likely a good while to walk on a day like this, or any day, and you've plenty of time to think and ponder, and that's what they were doing. They're going home, and they're going home after some of the most tumultuous events in their lives and in the life of the nation. I mean, I don't know if you're conscious or aware of how many people would have been in Jerusalem. But Josephus, the Jewish historian who was writing about 30 years after the death of Jesus, spoke of over 2 million people coming to Jerusalem for the Passover. If you can imagine that sort of number of people swelling, and then the hundreds of thousands of lambs, well, can you imagine that? And the bleeding and all the noise, and then of course the precincts of the temple, which we have to remember are extensive. The temple was massive. It wasn't just like a building like this. It was massive, and the crowds and the noise and the focus was on Jesus and all the events that went with that. So that's what they have been experiencing, and they're going home. If you were in Portrush on Easter on Wednesday, you'll get an idea of what that's like. Today, being wet, there'll not be so many people here. But when I used to work here, and I worked in my little office was over there in the house next door, I always remember the morning after. I mean, you come to Portrush, 9 o'clock any morning here, it's pretty empty. And no matter what the weather, no matter what the time of the year, and you look out and you see the streets are empty, and it's the after event of anything. And it's just that day after, that time when it's all gone, there is an emptiness anyway, but on this day there's an even bigger emptiness. And so I have 4 C's to journey through this journey with them. There's confusion, there's content, there's conviction, and then there's, I think I have called it, compulsion. I'm only on pages today. That's where this is. You've got me really at a time in my thinking when I was... I've really been wrestling with lots of these things over the last week or 10 days, and so I've been back and forwards, and I've thought we'll do this and we'll do that, and I've written stuff and I've thrown it away, and it's been a real interesting time. But that's why I think it's been very pertinent for us, because I really sense that these are the things that the Lord has to speak to us about, so, and I think we've been confirming that to one another. So let's think about the confusion. The confusion here is really what we discover in the lives of these 2 dear people. They're talking with each other about these things that had happened. So we know what they're chatting about. The subject of their conversation is the events of these days, these few days, and maybe the week. Because when Jesus came up that journey into Jerusalem, which of course can be traced all the way back to the 70 weeks that Daniel gives us, and to the very day. Now, don't ask me to give you the exact how, but I have read it and tried to understand it. But to the very day Jesus walks up into Jerusalem, as was predicted by Daniel, not just around and about, but to that day. And when he comes in, he's coming up into that moment like a lamb himself, the king to be crowned with a crown of thorns, but he's coming in as a lamb, and he is going to be crucified. And that's all part of an amazing narrative that they have been part of. They've gone through the emotional turbulence of this. It seems that these are not just 2 disciples who are just kind of observing from the outside, because they identify themselves with the group of disciples on a number of occasions. And so when it talks about them going back, they go back to the disciples and the upper room. That's where they go to. So I don't think they would have done that if they'd not been identifying closely with that inner circle. So they've been on this journey, this roller coaster of experience, and they find themselves now talking about it. And then Jesus himself draws near and goes with them. But their eyes are kept from recognizing him, invisible. We read these things and we just marvel at them. There's no scientific explanation for what's happening here. But interesting, in John's Gospel, chapter 20 there, it talks about how when Peter and John run to the tomb, Peter is the one who's, straight in there. As well. John looks in, it says he sees, but he doesn't go in. And then it says that Peter goes in and he sees the cloth around Jesus' head. There would be a gap between the shoulders and the head. That's the way they wrapped them. So that this that was wrapped around his head was set over, and the rest was just left as if it just had been the body, life sucked out of it, as it were. And he just sees it, and that's so convincing to Peter. Absolutely, he gets it. John had seen it, but then it says he goes in and he sees and believes. The 2 words for see are used there. When John's standing outside looking in, he sees it. He just sees it. Visual. It's like I see something. It's like I look at a picture and I see it. But when he goes in and he then experiences it, he sees and believes. The word there means he sees and understands. Do you know when somebody says, I see it now? Do you not see that? We say it when we're trying to teach. Do you not see it? Do you not get it? They say, no, I see it. No. And then later on, say, I see it now. I know what you're saying. I understand it. And that's what's happening with John. And he understands and believes. And that's something very important here, because there's something critical in that in terms of coming to faith and helping people to grow in faith. Because when you're working with young people, you are, as it were, giving them the picture. As we tell them the news and the stories and the gospel, and we all the way through, and with Esther, as it will be, again, you'll be telling them an amazing story where God is not even mentioned in Esther, as you know, not even anywhere. His name doesn't exist there, but yet you see him everywhere. But you don't see him, but you know it's there. And there's an understanding, and not everybody can get that. But that's what we're praying for, isn't it, in the lives of boys and girls and in our own hearts? That they move from seeing to understanding. Because if we don't understand, we cannot believe. And we often wonder why people don't believe and say, it's so clear. No, it's not clear. Something has to happen in our hearts to understand. We can see the whole narrative of the life of Jesus and the details of it and every aspect of it, but until something happens to put it all together in our hearts, it just doesn't make sense. And you may have had that experience yourself, or maybe not. I had that experience in my teens, I think, late teens, when I was about 18 or 19, when I was wrestling throughout a period. It'll be about 60 years this year since I first trusted the Lord, very consciously, though I'm sure the Lord was at work in my life before that. But then I went through a period where I family turmoil. My mother died, and I was sent to boarding school and stuff, and I kind of drifted away. And then I came back in my teens to really start to think again, and the Lord really began to work in my life. But I remember sitting across a table from a dear friend now who I didn't know then, and asking him those questions. But why was it that it was Jesus had to die? And what's so significant about Jesus and not all those other people? I couldn't get it. I couldn't understand it. I knew that it had happened, but I couldn't get it. It didn't make real sense to me, or the sense that it should have. And that took another period of time and the work of the Lord in my life to bring that to me, and I understood it. And then I was able to respond as I ought to. So here we have them, and they're kept from recognizing him purposefully. And it's interesting, isn't it, to think about that. This confusion is actually God ordained in one sense. Not their confusion about the events, but who is this person? And they don't really know, and he starts to walk along, and he's just there. He's a third person with them. Sometimes God does things like that, doesn't he? He's acting in strange ways. And I wonder, well, looking back on that now, we can see how it all makes sense, because that allowed them to tell their story. If they had immediately known it was Jesus, we wouldn't have this passage. We wouldn't have the teaching and the understanding it will bring to us. So there's a sense in which by doing something like that seems nearly kind of counterintuitive, the Lord is actually moving us forward. And maybe in your life at the moment, there are times when you're saying, Lord, I wish I understood. I wish this was simpler. I wish I could get this. I wish it wasn't so hard. Do you ever feel like that? Do you ever come to a passage in the Bible and you say, I haven't a clue what this is about? I do it all the time. Nearly every time I take up the Bible and start to read and study and prepare, I come to a point where I say, I'm really struggling here with something. Something in here. I'm trying to wrestle with this. Maybe people say, you're thinking too hard. Maybe I am. I don't know. I'm trying to get to that place to what's underneath this and where's it all fit and where's it going. But I'm so thankful that it's like that. Because if it wasn't like that, I wouldn't grow. I wouldn't develop. I wouldn't be stretched. So that my convictions would not be as strong as I would want them to be, or I hope and pray they will grow even more. Because we have to. We have to work at it. And so the Lord is doing something here. And maybe in your life you're in that place. Maybe you're saying, it's all so confusing. I just don't know. Is it worth? It is worth. Don't worry. Keep walking in the dark until the light comes. Keep walking in the dark. Keep on doing. The light will come. The light will definitely come. If you seek me with all your heart, you will find me. If you seek me with all your heart, you will find me. I promise, hold on to it. The Lord will reveal himself in those things where you struggle. And it'll mean you'll have to work, but he gave you the capacity to work. And he gives you the grace to work. And he gives you his Spirit to help you work. And so there they are, confused. Confused about what? Well, they're really confused about everything. They're confused about the strategy. They're confused about what is it all about? Because listen to what it says here. Why they stood still looking sad. And these are little moments in it. And then one of them, named Cleophas, said, are you the only visitor in Jerusalem who does not know the things that are happening here in these days? What things? Jesus said. And they say to him, well, concerning Jesus of Nazareth. And then they tell us what they understand. He's a man. He's a prophet, mighty indeed in word before God and all the people. And the chief priests and the rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. So what is it their understanding is? Well, they have an understanding of the purpose of Jesus as, on one level, come to redeem. They've got the right word, but they have something wrong about what's Jesus' purpose. He's not here just to redeem Israel. He's here to provide redemption. One of the 4 key things that Jesus did on the cross to redeem is pay the ransom for our captivity, enslavement to sin. He also, as we thought about in another evening there, propitiated, he appeased the wrath of God. He also justified us, he enabled us to be set free, and he also reconciled us so as we can be adopted into God's family. Those are the 4 massive and wonderful things that he has done for us, which are incredible motivations for us to tell other people when we understand them a little better and keep understanding, because they are deep things but important things. But they're confused. That's their understanding. And there are lots and lots of people in our world today who have an understanding of Jesus, but it's the wrong understanding. They have an understanding. He is somewhere in their thinking, but they really don't know. And I'm sure you're increasingly finding with boys and girls, when you talk to them about who Jesus is in schools and places, and you get the answers back, you get all sorts of strange answers. Who is Jesus? Many will say, I don't even know who Jesus is today. And I increasingly find that even in the latter years when I was in the primary schools here with the children, I don't really know who Jesus is. But even adults, loads and loads of people in our culture here today have not a clue who Jesus is, or why he came, or what the purpose is, or why they need to know him or come to know him, and how he can change and save them. They're just completely confused. But here are those who are actually looking to him still confused. We had hoped. Moreover, some of our women of our company amazed us. And they were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back saying that they had seen even a vision of angels who said he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb, so that's why we understand that they are part of that inner group, found it as the woman had said, but him they did not see. Isn't it amazing that someone can be so close to Jesus and yet not get things? You and I would most likely think, well, if I'd been there, maybe I would, but I don't think you would. I think we maybe give ourselves too much credit. This is people who've been close to the action and they're still not getting it. They need something else. And so there's confusion. And then Jesus says, well, let me give you some content. Let me give you some content here. And here we have this wonderful moment where, he says to them, "O foolish ones and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken." And then he says this one statement, "Was it not necessary that Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself." That's a very full, comprehensive statement Jesus gives. And in saying that, what Jesus is doing is giving us what we might call a hermeneutic, or a way of understanding the Bible. He says, the Bible is all about Jesus. The whole Bible is about Jesus. Now, we have to be careful that when we come to interpret parts of the Bible, we don't go straight, from here to here. There is a sense in which we can do that. When I was preparing for that, for talking about Elijah, it was Ralph Davis, I love his writing and his thinking. I connect with his mind somehow. And he was saying, some people go so quickly from here all the way. They can't wait to get to Jesus and the cross. He says they have to back off a bit, because they have to spend time understanding that there is an immediate message and point, as well as there a bigger story as well. So we don't want to lose that. But saying that at the same time, this gives us a way of understanding the Bible. And it means we have to maybe make ourselves think harder. But it is also another way of understanding the Bible in multi-HD, as it were. Because when you read things, you read and it sounds a bit, go through Leviticus and various parts of scriptures, you kind of go, what is this all about? And you're really struggling, and we need help. And Jesus always bringing, as it were, the sort of picture of Christ into this. We say, look, where does this help explain? How does it help me understand? Because it does help us understand. Understanding in the scriptures of the Old Testament, everything that we've been given, it really helps us to see, how is Jesus prophet, priest, and king, for example? Well, we have them all there in the scriptures, so we can go and see it, how I understand. He is the ultimate prophet. He is the ultimate priest. He is the ultimate King of kings. Wherever we go in the Old Testament, which is the Hebrew Bible, and it's the only Bible that existed then. And the New Testament, as you know, didn't exist. It was being written in the lives and in the events of of Jesus and the Gospels and the church and the Acts and the epistles. So when he gives them content, they are in a place where they can hear it, I think. Had they seen Jesus as he was, they would have missed this. They'd have been so kind of taken up with the moment, they just couldn't, they wouldn't have heard it. So by restraining their abilities, he helps them in another area of their lives to see. And they take it. There's a 7-mile journey of understanding going on there. It's just opening things up. And I think that is one of the things that we're called to do, is just to help people see Jesus. Really, that's, if you strip it all back, it's all about Jesus. Because if you take Jesus out of it, there is nothing left. There's some interesting stories. And that sometimes is that's what some people do with the Bible. They give us interesting stories, dramatic stories. But if they don't have Jesus in it, then there's nothing more. But when Jesus is there, when it leads us to him, that's the most important thing. And when we're ministering to people, if we don't bring them to Jesus, we leave them always short of the hope we had hoped. We'll leave them short of the hope. And they'll be going away maybe worse than they came. And so for you and I, this is helpful as well, because it helps us when we approach the Bible. I want to understand Jesus in this right from the very beginning. Genesis and Exodus, everywhere all the way through. Now, maybe this is not new for you, I'm sure. By no means is it new. But for some of us, it's not easy. And a lot of things have been written. In the last 20, 25 years, a lot more has been written about this. It's not as if it's new, even in writing. People have been writing and reflecting on the content of Scripture and the person of Jesus forever. But sometimes it goes through little periods, phases of history when things emphasize. And this is a good period to be living, because a lot of that re-emphasis is coming back into the church again, I think. I have a new study Bible for the ESV, and in it there's a section at the back. It's actually worth getting the study version just for the bits at the back, the kind of the appendix. And in it there's one section which looks at what we call salvation in the Old Testament. Really, it just takes you through. It's just like a kind of like a dictionary, as it were, of Jesus in the Old Testament. So you just turn to it for your reference, and if you're in a passage, and you will look then, it'll help you understand how this connects to Jesus. And so it's a help to your understanding. And sometimes you'll think, oh, right, I wouldn't have seen that. Or sometimes you'll say, I wouldn't have done that. Do you know what I mean? You'd say, oh, right, so that makes sense then. I can see how that figures. Sometimes you might still struggle with it because you're not sure, but that's okay. But it's a really helpful thing. So Jesus says it was necessary, the necessary work of Jesus, it was necessary. And that really gives emphasis and priority to the work of Jesus, because the whole of the Old Testament is pointing constantly to the work of Christ and the cross. So there is content, and then there's convincing. Well, I think that there's the pivotal moment in this, in terms of the chronology, and maybe also in their will and what's going on, is verse 28 and 29. It says then, so they drew near to the village to which they were going. He acted as if he were going farther, but they urged him strongly, saying, stay with us, for it is toward evening and the day is far spent. So he went in to stay with them. That's just a little practical moment, isn't it? You can see the kind of going on in that, that when it says he acted as if he was going on, I'm sure you've done that sort of thing, you know yourself, where you kind of give the, it's great, thanks, been good to see you, and so you give the sort of sense that that's it over, but you're kind of leaving it open. There's a little kind of moment, and they're maybe wondering, their hospitality of the Eastern hospitality is a bit like Irish hospitality. You wouldn't send somebody away without putting the kettle on, at least in days gone by. In modern day, it might be kind of different, but I think it's certainly very important still in our culture. So this idea of hospitality, the day is far spent, come on, stay with us. That moment, whatever's going on in their minds, there's a process going on, and will we or won't we? Or, I don't know, did they say, should we ask him for dinner? Have you ever had that time? Should we ask him for dinner? Should we ask him to stay? Somebody has come, and you go out to the kitchen and say, have you got enough? Should we ask him to stay? Or whatever it is, I don't know. But every time we open up our hearts to hospitality, there'll be blessing in it, I'm sure. And on this occasion, I think there's a pivotal moment going there where they invite Jesus. I think Jesus is also forcing that. There's something in that. That's what I read there. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I get the sense that Jesus is nearly drawing that out of them. Do you know what I mean? Where he's not saying, oh, is this your home? Look, maybe I can come and have dinner with you guys. He's not saying that. He's giving the sense that he's going on, so he's forcing them to have to make a decision. Now, for these two disciples who have heard Jesus but now don't know it's Jesus, which of course they've been walking for miles, having this conversation, don't know it's Jesus, there's something that God has done to prevent them, their choice is part of this. That's part of this journey for them. They have a place in it, and it's a very simple thing. Isn't it really simple? God isn't asking them to kind of bring their Greek New Testament or their Hebrew Bible out and start to go through it. He's asking them to open their door. He's asking them to make an extra place at the table. He's asking them to share their home and share their time. And that's something very, very simple. And when the Lord is saying to you, look, I'm not asking you to do this. Would you make space in your life for me? Would you make space in your day for me? Would you push aside and create enough space for me to be there alongside you? I think there's something of that in this. And he's not asking you to do the heavy lifting. He's asking you to create the moment. And that is something that is a means of grace, I think. One of those means by which God comes to minister to us. And when we create that space in our lives, that's what he's doing. And we're saying, it's kind of almost like whatever way you work in your day, your week, your time, the rhythm of your life, and say, I want to make space. Jesus, please come and stay with me. Come and sit down. Come and help me. And you open up your Bible and you have whatever way you do things. And I like to have a notebook and a pen because I find I need to engage with it that way. When we do that, he always does start to open up things to us, doesn't he? He teaches us. And so it's about being intentional, and it's taking time, and it's not rushing on to the next thing thinking that I have all those things to do, but even if it's massively important preparation of preparing to speak to boys and girls or others or to adults or whatever, that's important. But he says, it's maybe more important, just take time now, and we will always benefit from it. And it requires a little degree of interruption, doesn't it? I mean, now, Eastern hospitality was such that you wouldn't really see it as an interruption. You would see it as a privilege. And there's a sense in which, when we understand what's going on, it is a privilege. When we make that space and say, Jesus, come and stay with me. He is with you by his Spirit. He's always there. But there's sort of an intentionality of saying, let's have this time. And in that moment, then something happens. And it's whenever they then sit down at the table, he takes the bread, he blesses it, he breaks it, and he gives it to them. And then it says their eyes were opened and they recognized him. And just, of course, at that moment he vanishes. It's just, he's gone. But think about it. He sits down. He takes the bread and he blesses it. Now, this is echoes, hasn't it? Lots of echoes in there. You know those echoes. You've told the story of the feeding of the 5,000. You've told the story of the upper room. You've been in those places, and you know they were significant. And whether they were in any of those, we don't know. But I don't doubt that they heard about some of them. And especially in the feeding of the 5,000, which, although it had a massive physical impact, and John tells the meaning of it the next day, when all the people come because they want they're on the food aid, he says, well, you're not here because you're only here because of the food. But he said, there is another bread, the bread of life. And when he talks about that, most of them all disappear. But some get it and they realize that this is the manna. This is the Jesus in the Old Testament in the Exodus. This is the manna that God has provided that lasts forever. This is the manna that is supernatural. Jesus is the manna. And these things all come together. They see it. And that's just God's wonder and miracle and everything coming together and all those things linking in together. And when they see it, their eyes are opened. That's this idea of seeing and understanding. They understand. And so when we're coming to the scriptures, we're praying that prayer of the psalmist, open my eyes that I might see the wonderful things, that I would really get this. There are times in our lives when we're reading the Bible and we're studying and we're reading those who maybe the Lord has sent to help us as we study alongside, and praise God for those people. And praise God that you and I live in a time when there's so many of them and there's so much resource out there to help us. Although I would say, thin your friends down. You know what I mean? Thin them down. Don't have an army around you. Just have a group around you here, So my son-in-law is a pastor in the States, and whenever he's preparing a new series, he gets just about every book under the sun. And he's a brilliant mind, and he's a great pastor and preacher. But I'm saying, far too many books. No. I said, find about 5. That'll be enough. And so I'm saying to you, have a few really good friends. Do you know what I mean? So. And if you know someone who's preaching and teaching inspires you, ask them, who are your friends? Who do you read that really helps you, that has opened up the scriptures so as you can see it in a new way? And that is what's happening here. So there is conviction. And this is really significant at that moment. This is happening. They see things. They see things through things. The opening up comes through the breaking of the bread. The things they see show other things about Jesus. And then they have this, did not our hearts burn within us as we talked on the road? It's an interesting phrase. Something going on within them, some sense of God. And there are those times in our lives, aren't there, whenever you're just so aware, you just know there's something here. I get a scent of something really, really different. God, I sense something in this passage. You're really helping me to understand, and you're aware of the closeness of that truth and the work of the Spirit in your heart. And that's such a blessing and a gift. And it leads then from confusion and content to conviction to compulsion. Well, compulsion, it's the compulsion to return, isn't it? And we were thinking about pressing on. And I think in my mind, the way my mind was working here was that the pressing on of these individuals came in a very interesting way. They were sad and disappointed, and they were kind of like, we're going home and it's all over. But now things are changed, and they are pressing on. Something has happened. The thing that has happened is that they have come to understand, even though they never see Jesus again physically. They will see him again. Of course, they're going to see him when they get back to Jerusalem because he will meet with them there. But their understanding has changed everything to enable them to take the next step, to turn around and to go back the way they have come, and to put new strength into their step and into their heart. And that's just such an encouragement for us. That same hour they rise and return to Jerusalem. It was a dark night. They have 7 miles. And they have just walked the 7 miles, which most likely seemed no time, because when you're walking with someone in a situation like that, you don't realize how far you've walked. You know that sort of way. If you're out dating and walking, I recommend it as a brilliant way to go dating. Walk. It'll keep your 4 feet on the ground, and that's a good thing to begin with. And it'll keep you facing the same direction, which means you can talk about things you might not want to talk about face to face. So if you're telling her you love her, it'll be easier if you're looking out there maybe the first time. And when you say you love her, as Elizabeth Elliot says, remember, the next thing you should say after that is what? Will you marry me? So remember, don't use that throwaway unless you mean it. That's Elizabeth Elliot. Anyway, she was a straight talker, wasn't she? But, you know, walking and having that, you never know the time is gone. And now you're walking back. But, you know, there's something about the gospel, the truth, about knowing Jesus and seeing him and encountering him that takes away the fear, that takes away the distance, that takes away the exhaustion. It's true. You know what it's like to be tired. We all know what it's like to be confronted with the physical realities of our world wherever they are. But there's something about the sustaining, motivating, and energizing of the work of the gospel in the life of Christ. And I'm not saying you don't need to take your Sabbath rest. We do need to do that. We need to have rhythms, and we need to be careful about that. But I think there's something so energizing about the gospel. It drives us on. The urgency, the joy of it. And that, in this particular sense, must have been ultimately the massive thing in their hearts. The truth of it, the joy of it, the reality of it, the potential of it. All of those things are what drive us on and keep us going. And we need from time to time to be just reminded of those things. You and I, in our lives, just to be reminded of that when you've come here to conference and maybe you're working away in a situation with a small group or of boys and girls, and it's like, you know, it's like as though they're hard work. Do you know what I mean? You see very little response, very little fruit. You wonder, is anything happening? They're more interested in fighting with things and doing stuff than they are in listening to you or whatever. And we need to be energized again about the gospel. To go back, this is true. This is the only thing that is really true that matters in this world. This is the one thing. Everything else has significance, but this is the significant thing. Everything else those boys and girls are doing in their lives is important. It's part of who they are. But without knowing this, all those other things will never make sense. This is the thing that will transform everything. And we need to believe that. And our coming to understand, that's the critical point here. Their understanding and seeing Jesus then sends them off to bring the blessing of that to the disciples whom they discover, say, would I tell you what happened here? Which only confirms what has happened with them. And of course, that's another story which we don't have time for today. But let me pray. Father, thank you so much that you meet us on whatever road we are on, in whatever state we are in our lives. You take the initiative to engage with us. Two people who were not really seeking you, they were not reaching out and saying, Lord, come and open our eyes. But you came in your mercy and your grace, and you met with them. You so arranged things in a paradoxical, strange way that they would not see you in order that they would ultimately see you in a new way. And Father, help us to trust you in those times when it feels like that, when we cannot see, that by just keeping walking in the dark and looking into the one who is the bread of life, that we will come into the light of a better understanding that will help us then to share that with others. And it's our prayer that all of this will then bring glory to your name as we praise you for seeing and knowing who you are. In Christ our Savior we ask this. Amen.